What if a man so rich and powerful thought he could cheat death itself, only to be buried by his own greed? Stay till the end to discover how a clever village girl outsmarted a tyrant in the most unaccepted way. In the village of Ukuta, there lived a man named Baba Monti, the richest and greediest man anyone had ever known. His compound was the largest in the village, built of fine red clay with golden decorations on the doors. He had bags of cowries, gold and treasures hidden within his chambers. Yet, despite his wealth, Baba Monti feared one thing above all: death. For years he paid the greatest herbalists and seers, offering them gold and cattle in change for a way to escape death, but none could promise him eternal life. Then one day he heard whispers of a clever girl named Zaina, known for her ability to outwit even the most cunning men. Desperate, Baba Monti summoned her to his compound. Zaina, a young girl of 16 with sharp eyes and even sharper mind, accepted the challenge. If Baba Monti wanted to cheat death, she would give him exactly what he asked for, but no in the way he accepted. And so the game between greed and wisdom began. This is just the beginning of an unbelievable story. Stick with me till the end to see how this tale unfolds. And if you love African folk tales, don't forget to like, subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story. When Zaina arrived at Baba Monti's mansion, she found him pacing near a table filled with gold coins. The air smelled of roasted yam and palm oil, but there was a deep unease in the man's eyes. "Zaina," Baba Monti said, his voice trembling slightly, "you are said to be the smartest girl in Ukuta. Tell me, can you save me from death?" Zaina tilted her head, pretending to think deeply. "A great task, Baba Monti, but with your vast riches, perhaps there is a way." Baba Monti's face lit up. "I will pay you any amount, just tell me what to do." Zaina smiled inwardly. She already knew how she would trick this foolish man. "First, I must consult the ancestors' wisdom. Meet me by the baobab tree at midnight alone." Baba Monti hesitated, but his fear of death was greater than his doubts. He nodded. "I will be there." Little did he know, Zaina's plan was already in motion. As the moon rose high, Zaina prepared for the night. She gathered white chalk, a cowrie-filled calabash, and a bundle of dried leaves. Her plan required more than just words. It needed fear. At midnight, Baba Monti arrived at the great baobab tree, a place where the elders said spirits gathered. He shivered as the wind rustled the leaves. Zaina appeared from the shadows, her voice low and mysterious. "Baba Monti, the spirits have spoken. If you wish to escape death, you must follow their command." Baba Monti swallowed hard. "What must I do?" Zaina poured the cowries onto the ground, watching their pattern. Then she gasped. "The spirits say you must bury yourself alive for 7 days. If you do, death will never find you." Baba Monti's eyes widened in horror. "Bury myself? But..." "Shh," Zaina whispered. "The spirits are watching. If you hesitate, death will come for you tonight." Sweat trickled down Baba Monti's face. His greed had made him powerful, but now fear made him weak. The sun hung high over Ukuta, its golden rays scorching the dry earth as Baba Monti stood behind his massive compound, staring at the wide open space where his grave would soon be. A lump formed in his throat, but he pushed the fear away. "I will not die. I will defeat death itself," he reminded himself. Determined, he called his most trusted servants. and ordered them to dig a deep pit behind his compound. The workers, confused but obedient, picked up their shovels, carving into the dry, cracked earth. Sweat trickled down their backs as they worked under the merciless sun. One of the workers hesitated. "Master, why do you need such a deep hole?" Baba Monti scowled, his greedy eyes narrowing. "That is none of your concern. Do your job and be silent." The workers exchanged uneasy glances. The whispers began. Why would a man as rich as Baba Monti need a grave-like hole behind his home? By midday, the pit was deep enough that a man could stand inside and disappear completely. The workers wiped their brows, looking to Baba Monti for further instructions. But before they could ask, Zaina arrived. She walked with an air of calmness, her bare feet barely disturbing the dust on the ground. Her bright eyes scanned the pit, and she nodded approvingly. "Well done, Baba Monti," she said smoothly. "The spirits are pleased." The workers stiffened at the mention of spirits. Some suddenly stepped back, their unease growing. Zaina turned to Baba Monti, her tone dropping to a serious whisper. "But the spirits have one more demand. You must dig the final layer alone." Baba Monti froze. "Alone?" Zaina nodded. "If another hand touched the soil, the spell will break and death will find you instantly." Baba Monti, though reluctant, dismissed the workers. He could not risk ruining his chance at eternal life. So as the sun dipped low, he picked up the shovel and began digging his own grave. And Zaina watched silently, knowing that the trap was nearly complete. Baba Monti wiped the sweat from his brow, his arms aching from the long hours of digging. The pit was now deep enough to swallow a man whole. It was lined with dry, crumbling soil. The setting sun bathed the village in an orange glow, but inside his heart there was only darkness. 7 days, he whispered to himself. Only 7 days and I will be immortal. But doubt crept into his mind. What if the spirits were lying? What if Zaina had misled him? His gaze flickered to Zaina. He stood nearby, watching with an unreadable expression. Her small hands clutched a woven basket, as if she carried the weight of secrets untold. "Are you certain this will work?" Baba Monti asked, his voice tight. Zaina tilted her head slightly, as if considering his question. Then, in a voice as calm as an evening breeze, she said, "The spirits never lie, Baba Monti, but they do not tolerate doubt. If you question them, you risk everything." A shiver ran through him. He had come too far to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, he climbed into the pit, his fine robes collecting dust as he settled inside. Zaina stepped forward, lifting a wooden plank and setting it across the top of the hole, leaving only a small space for air. "You must not leave this place until sunrise on the 8th day," she instructed. "No matter what happens, no matter what you hear, you must stay buried." Baba Monti nodded stiffly, his fingers gripping the ground of water and bundle of dry fruit he had brought with him. He had prepared for this, or so he thought. As the last plank was placed over his grave, darkness surrounded him, thick and suffocating. Above, Zaina dusted her hands and walked away, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. The richest man in Ukuta had just buried himself alive, and no one was coming to dig him out. By the next morning, news spread like wildfire across Ukuta. Baba Monti had vanished. The villagers murmured among themselves, eyes wide with disbelief. Could it be true? Had the richest and most feared man in the village really disappeared? At first, some believed he had gone on a long journey, perhaps to trade his gold in a faraway lands. But Zaina, standing near the village square, shook her head with a knowing smile. "He has not traveled anywhere," she told the gathered crowd. "He has gone to seek immortality." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Some of the elders frowned, exchanging uneasy glances. "The man who taxed us until our pots were empty," one woman scoffed, shaking her head in disbelief. "He seeks eternal life?" Zaina separated her arms, her voice calm but firm. "Yes, he buried himself alive, hoping to trick death itself." She let her words linger, watching the shock separate across their faces. For a moment there was silence, then laughter. Loud, hearty, unrestrained laughter. The people of Ukuta, who had suffered years under Baba Monti's greed, laughed in sheer relief. Some clapped their hands, others hugged their neighbors, and the market women banged their wooden spoons against clay pots, creating a joyful rhythm. "For years he stole from us," an elderly man said, his voice trembling with emotion. "Now he has stolen himself from the world." The crowd roared in agreement. A group of young men, eager to reclaim what had been taken from their families, marched toward Baba Monti's grand compound. The mansion, once guarded fiercely by his loyal servants, stood eerily silent. With their master gone, the guards had abandoned the house, leaving it open for the people to take back what was rightfully theirs. Inside, they found sacks of grains, jars of palm oil, bolts of colorful fabrics, and chests filled with the cowries and gold. One by one, they carried these treasures back to the village square, dividing them among the families who had suffered the most. Zaina turned to Mama Asha, an elderly woman who had once been forced to sell her last goat to pay Baba Monti's unfair taxes. "Now, Mama Asha, you will eat well again." Mama Asha touched Zaina's cheek gently, her wrinkled face breaking into a smile. "Child, you have done what no warrior could. You defeated a tyrant without nothing but your mind." Zaina smiled but said nothing. The real lesson had not yet come. Baba Monti was still beneath the ground, and soon he would realize what it meant to truly lose everything. Deep beneath the earth, Baba Monti lay in darkness. At first he had felt powerful, convinced that he had outwitted death itself. He had imagined himself emerging on the 8th day, untouched by time, forever beyond the reach of sickness and misfortune. But as hours dragged on, reality began to creep in like an unwelcome visitor. The air was stale and heavy, pressing against his lungs. The water he had brought was nearly empty, and his small ration of dry fruit was already gone. His stomach ground in a protest. A hunger he had never known clawing at his insides. 7 days, he whispered to himself, trying to stay calm. But the silence was unbearable. There were no servants to call upon, no drums in distance, no village chatter, only the sound of his own breathing, growing faster and shallower as fear slithered into his mind. Then the whispers began. At first he thought they came from above, faint murmurs drifting through the thin gap of air left in the wooden covering. Then they shifted, seeping from the very walls of his grave. "Baba Monti, you cannot hide from us." His breath hitched. Who's there?" he rasped, his voice hoarse from thirst. The whispers swirled around him, shifting from one side to another, growing louder, more insistent. "You took from the people, and now you have taken yourself." Sweat beaded on his forehead. He shut his eyes tightly, trying to block out the sounds, but they grew louder, echoing in his bones. You buried yourself in gold, Baba Monti, and now gold cannot save you. His chest tightened. He clawed at the wooden planks above him, desperate to push them aside, but they were too heavy. The dirt pressed down, his grave feeling smaller, suffocating. Dig, Baba Monti, dig yourself free, or stay here forever. With a strangled cry, he began to claw at the dirt, his fingers scraping the rough earth. But for every handful of soil he pushed aside, more collapsed in on him. Panic overtook him. He had always believed his wealth made him powerful, that his gold, his land, his influence could protect him from anything, even death. But here, in this silence, endless grave, he realized the truth. He was powerless, and death had been waiting for him all along. Baba Monti's fingernails cracked as he clawed desperately at dirt, his once pristine hands now raw and bleeding. His breathing was ragged. The whispers had not stopped. They grew louder, filling the darkness with their mocking chorus. You buried yourself, Baba Monti, now remain where you belong. Gold cannot save you now. The words wrapped around him like vines of dread, squeezing the last traces of arrogance and greed from his heart. Above ground, the village of Ukuta thrived. Zaina sat near the great baobab tree, watching as people reclaimed their lives. The fields once cast into ruin flourish again. The market, once heavy with worry, now overflowed with trade and laughter. And Baba Monti's grand mansion, it stood abandoned, its reach scattered among the people. No one searched for him. No one whispered his name in fear or reverence. For the first time, Baba Monti was forgotten, buried in silence. Beneath the air, Baba Monti's strength faded. His arm, once adorned with golden bracelets, now lay limp at his sides. His once commanding voice had turned into harsh, broken gasps. His vision blurred, and for the first time in his life, he felt small. I was the richest man in Ukuta, he thought, his mind slipping. How could this happen to me? Then, as his heart slowed, he heard one final whisper, softer than the rest, but far colder. Even kings must die, Baba Monti. And with that, the earth swallowed him whole. The girl who defeated death in Ukuta. The story of Baba Monti's downfall became a lesson passed down for generations. Children sat by the fire, listening as elders told of the rich man who tried to cheat death and buried himself in greed. And at the heart of the tale was Zaina, the girl who used wisdom, not force, to defeat a tyrant. She never claimed his wealth for herself. Instead, she walked freely through the village, living not as a ruler, but as one of the people. For she had already won the greatest prize of all, freedom, and no gold could ever compare.